Hey everyone, Chang here and welcome to my channel. Now, for today's video, we're gonna demystify. Just trying to keep myself entertained a little bit, right? So what's gonna happen is that I'm gonna show you guys these problems. Now, before I show you guys these problems, I'm gonna preface this. First and foremost, these problems are taken from a pretty prestigious university used in the past as final exam questions. So if you think about it this way, oh my God, these are final exam questions. That means these are the problems that determine whether you do well or not well in the class. So it must be super difficult just from our experience, right? It's a college level final exam math question. Now here's the thing though. The reason I want to preface this is because guess what? Yes, sometimes it's gonna be more complicated just based on the instructor. You know, they want to really test you. That's fine. But most of the times, actually in our head, just thinking about the context of the problem itself actually makes it more challenging, more complex, more difficult just because we think it's gonna be, right? Based on that environmental factor. So that's what I'm starting with this. Realize that no matter what, right? If it's gonna be complex, it's most likely basically smaller chunks, smaller, simpler concepts mixed together, right? If it's not, then it might just be, well, we really need to sit down, breathe, and try to look and see if we truly understand the topic. If we understand the topic, guess what? We understand the problem. We can solve it. We're good to go. So let's look at these final exam questions. All right, so they are. There's 4 of them. First and foremost, we're all just trying to solve it, right? The first one is going to be 6x squared plus 7x plus 2 equals 0. Second one is going to be 49x squared minus 4 equals 0, right? The third one, x squared minus x minus 30 equals 0. And the last one, the scariest one, we have 5x cubed plus 20x squared plus 20x equals 0. Now, once again, yes, maybe they look a little more complex than your standard homework question from a textbook or whatsoever, right? But they're really not that bad, right? Overall, we're solving. Most of them are quadratic, and later we're going to realize this is actually technically quadratic as well, right? There's things you can do that basically tools of your solving quadratic repertoire will work. So there it is, these 4 questions. So I'm going to go over each and every one of them individually, and guess what? Since they are just quadratic, all of the tools that we have for quadratics work, right? We have our standard use your experience and factor it, right? Based on what we think can happen. That works just fine. There are, well, your end-all be-all one formula that you should probably memorize or know how to work with, right? Your quadratic formula. Just with those alone. Final exam questions, so what? We can solve them. Let's take a look at the first one. All right, so for our first question, once again, 6x squared plus 7x plus 2 equals 0. Now, here's just from my experience, right? Normally, if they have a coefficient in front of the x squared, they want it broken down in a way that it's not prime. What do I mean? Well, 6, you can break it down into 2 different, I guess you could say, factors, right? You can have your 1 times 6 or your 3 times 2. Well, 1 times 6 is definitely viable. And if you encounter an instructor who's purposely going to do that, someone like me in the past, right? I would totally do that. But most of the times, if you encounter a problem like this, they probably want the other one, the 3 and 2. So let's just go with 3 and 2 and see what happens, right? So 3x is going to be one of those factors, and 2x is going to be the other one, right? There it is. Okay, now that takes care of our 6. Now, the other thing, even though 7 is very important, right? We want 2 numbers that multiply to become 2. Well, luckily for us, 2 is just prime, so it's going to be 1 and 2. Now, in this case, afterwards, you can always just put them in and check. Hopefully it works. So for example, let's just start off with 1 and 2. All right, let's just do plus 1 and plus 2. Well, in that case, we have 6x because we have, or 6x squared, right? Because we have 3x times 2x, right? We're distributing. Well, that's 6x squared, and then we have our 3x times 2, that's 6x, 1 times 2x, that's 2x. Now we have a problem, because guess what? We have a 6x and a 2x add together, that's going to be 8x, not 7x. Well, okay, that probably doesn't work. Let's change it. Let's do 2 here and 1 here. All right, cool. Once again, 6x squared, great. 3x, 2 times 2x, that's 4x. All of a sudden, 3x and 4x, 7x. Looks promising. 2 and 1, great. There it is. That's our factor, right? And once again, we're not done because we're trying to solve it, meaning we're trying to figure out what x is, such that when you multiply these two numbers together, it equals 0. So, well, we just look at it by parts, right? What would make this part 0? What would make this part 0? So if we set this equal to 0, the first answer we get is going to be you subtract 2, and then you divide by 3, negative 2 over 3. Now, the second one is you subtract 1 divided by 2, that's negative 1 over 2, right? So these are the two answers for this one. Now, let's just say this didn't work. And let's just say that we're not entirely sure. And of course, maybe the instructor is even worse. It's so mean, and they decide to make it fractions, right? Of course. That could be a possibility. But remember, you have your end-all be-all, your quadratic formula. So if you don't want to go through that, if you can't see this right away, then yeah, just use your quadratic formula, because guess what? Finals, usually they allot you a lot more time. So take advantage of that. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, if you can't memorize that, I think there's a song or something. I'm sure if you Google it or look it up on YouTube, you can have that song playing in the background all the time, and it will ingrain into your memory until you dream about it and, you know, all that lovely stuff. All right, so here we are. All right, negative b, that's going to be right here, right? Negative 7 plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 7 squared. 7 times 7, 49. Minus 4 times a, which is going to be 6, and c is going to be 2, all over 2a. So it's going to be 2 times 6. Okay, well, in that case, that's going to be fairly simple. Let's just write it right here. It's going to be negative 7 plus or minus 49, and this is what, 4 times 6 times 2, that's 48. So 49 minus 48, that's 1. Square root of 1 over 2 times 6, that's 12. So technically negative 7 plus or minus 1 over 12. So that gives you two possible results, right? You have either the negative 8 over 12 or negative 6 over 12. That looks different, but simplify it, right? Take the 4 from top and bottom, you get negative 2 over 3. Take the 6 from top and bottom, you get negative 1/2. And there you go, right? This actually verifies. It helps you check that what we did here is correct. All right, so our first problem is done, right? We're gonna just cross this out. Boom, right there. We solved it in two different ways. Let's look at the second problem. We have 49x squared minus 4. Now here's the thing. This is one where I honestly think it's actually pretty cool. If you commit it to memory, that's great. If not, that's entirely fine. But just know that usually if you have a quadratic, right, and there's no middle term, that means the middle terms somehow canceled each other out. So a good one to know is just basically a squared minus b squared is equal to a plus b times a minus b, where a and b is basically whatever term you want it to be, right? So in this case, for example, we know that the middle term is gone. This one must be our a squared. This one must be our b squared. So just looking at this alone, right, and knowing this, if we memorize this and just know how to use it, great. We already can solve this. That's just going to be what? 7x minus or plus 2, and then 7x minus 2, right? Just to follow this convention right here. There it is. And just like that, that equals 0, and then you can solve, right? Subtract 2 divided by 7. So it's going to be a negative 2 over 7, or add 2 divided by 7. That's going to be 2 over 7. Because once again, we're trying to make sure that these two multiplied together become 0. Is either this one's going to be 0 or this one's going to be 0. So you're just solving them individually by saying equals 0 and figuring out what x is. There it is. Right? Two different possibilities, this or this. Now, of course, if you don't memorize this, right, and you're not sure, you can always break it down. All right, 49 is, guess what? It's going to be 40, or 7 times 7, or 49 times 1, right? It's most common one. Or even better, why waste your time? Do the quadratic formula, right? Now, what happens in this case? Because there's no b, right? Well, if there's no b, then b is technically 0. So if we're going to use the quadratic formula for this, that's one thing you have to be careful of. Remember, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I know you're bored of hearing me say that already. There it is. And then now, we know this is 0 and this is 0. So technically, all we have is just plus or minus the square root of 4, right? Or negative 4. negative because you're subtracting right there. Negative 4a is going to be what? 49. And c is going to be a negative 4 as well. All over 2a, which is going to be 2 over 49. Boom, just like that. Right? And then the negative cancel each other out, which is good because we don't want negatives inside the square root. So all we have is just plus or minus, and that's going to be 4. You can technically take it out because there's 2 of them, and 49 is 7. 7 times 7, so you could take that out. So basically 4 times 7, which is going to be 28 over 2 times 49, plus or minus. Hopefully you guys can see this right now. Let me just move this right here. So what is that? You can simplify that. That's going to be 14 over 49 plus or minus. And you can simplify it even further, right? Dividing by 7 on both sides, or top and bottom, I mean. That's going to be 2 over 7 plus or minus. And boom, just like that, we verified our answer. All right, second problem gone. Boom, just like that. Our third problem, actually, interestingly enough, when I saw this as the third problem, I thought it was pretty cool. This is one of the, I want to say, more simpler problem, right? These are the type of problem you probably see in your standard classwork and homework kind of questions where they just really want to get you practicing the skill. So here we are. We have an x squared minus x minus 30. So we want two numbers that basically add together become negative x or negative 1, right? And then multiply together become negative 30. Well, 30 most of the time is probably 6 and 5. And 6 and 5, with some finagling, you can probably get 1 or negative 1. So that's good. So let's look at that. This one, just by our experience, right, and just our reasoning just now, right, we have an x and x, and it's going to be a minus and a plus, right, because they have to cancel each other out. If you have 6 and 5 adding together, it's going to be 11 instead of 1. So one of them has to be positive, one of them has to be negative. Well, since it's a negative, then most likely the bigger number must be negative. In this case, it's going to be subtract 6 plus 5. Once again, still equals 0, and then we figured it out, right? At this point, set this equals 0 and this equals 0 and solve. So x is either going to be 6 or negative 5. Okay, simple as that. So that's one way. I'm not going to go into the quadratic formula because at this point you guys should be pretty good at it. Since I went over these two, definitely use it to check if you have extra time to make sure that this is the case. So there is our answer. This is the simplest of these 4 problems. Let's move on to the super difficult one. All right, third problem conquered. We are moving on to the fourth and the most difficult one. These are the make and break of your grade. Now, these are my favorite kind of problem. The reason for that is because this is sort of a hidden quadratic, but they make it a little more difficult. My hint or my suggestions when you guys encounter a problem like this, any form of higher degree polynomial, the first thing you should ask yourself is that variable on every single term? If it is, that means you can factor things out, right? And then, of course, there's always the number that you can factor out as well. Now, this one, lovely, right? There are variables in every single term. That means at least you can factor out the variables, if not the numbers as well. Well, hopefully, at this case, we realize, well, this is a 5, this is 20, and 20. Of course, they share a specific number together. So you can factor that out as well. So what would it look like that would make it a lot more simple? Well, we're going to factor out two things. We're going to factor out the 5, because it can be taken out from all of them, and we're going to factor out the x's, right? So let's look at this situation. So we're taking out a 5 and an x, and let's just see what we have left over. Well, in this case, the first term, right, you take out 5 and an x, what you have is x squared. Second term, you take out 5 and an x, what you have is going to be 4x, right? Third term, you take out 5 and an x, you got 4. All of a sudden, ignoring this for the moment, this looks a lot better. We really love that. So there it is, right? Now we can factor this guy. You can use your quadratic formula if you want to, but hopefully, you know, this is one of the most common questions in like classwork and homework. So hopefully you guys can see it right away, right? Two numbers that multiply together become 4, add together become 4. It has to be 2. So in this case, you're going to factor it out. That's technically 5x. It's going to be x plus 2. X plus 2 equals 0. Now, at this point, you're trying to solve it, right? Basically, there are 3 numbers that are multiplying together to become 0. So guess what? Once again, any number that multiply another number to become 0, one of the numbers, at least one, has to be 0. In this case, it's going to be 2 because these two are technically exactly the same. So, if that's the case, well, 5 times something, 5x equals 0, so x must be 0 for this one, right? Let's just write it up here. That's one of the answer. The second one and the third one's the same thing. X plus 2 equals 0. What must x be? -2. Just like that, there is your answer. Now, can you just plug this into the quadratic formula? No. Once again, remember, quadratic formula only works for quadratic equation. You can use this section because this is a quadratic after you factor it out and then solve, right? So plain and simple, even though this seems scary, it's a cubic function. Once you factor it out, guess what? You're working with quadratic again, and you can solve it. All right, so there you have it. 4 questions that are from a standard algebra final exam. Now, once again, yes, I really wanted to emphasize the fact that there was a standard final algebra exam just to hammer in the idea that the context of the problem makes or breaks your way of approaching the problem. It sounds difficult. They're final exam questions, right? Of course they're going to be complicated. But guess what? Some of the complication, actually most of the complication, comes from the fact that you already have this preconceived notion that it is a final exam and it must be hard. Math doesn't work that way. Yes, there's going to be complex or more difficult problem. Most of the time it's just going to be different subcomponents working together. The other time, right, it's still going to be based on what you've learned, right? It doesn't evolve based on the context. So in this case, I showed you guys one about factoring. And hopefully, even though it looks a little more complex, just with the standard tools, making sure that you are a master of that specific topic, you will conquer the problem no matter the case. So hopefully you find this helpful, at least enlightening or making something a little more obvious, right? If you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe. I will see you in the next video.